I think we're just about to start.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, sorry.
You're listening to Politics with David Atkins on Burn FM.
Welcome to Politics with David Atkins. We are live from the Burn FM studios in Birmingham. It's great to have Taylor Francis, Bournbrook Journalist, and Jake Cooper, Conservative Councillor, live with me today in the studios. On tonight's show, we will be discussing the government's response to the coronavirus, the budget and the US election. I will also be playing my interview with Labour MP Preet Gill, who is the MP for Birmingham Edgbaston, and she was elected as the first female British Sikh MP back in 2017. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty at the minute with the coronavirus in Ireland. They've decided to shut all of their universities until the 29th of March. However, the University of Birmingham has no current cases, so we are still open. And Boris Johnson has decided to keep all schools and universities open. Firstly, some context on coronavirus for my listeners. The UK death toll has doubled to 21 in the last 24 hours, with the UK reporting over 1,000 cases. The government has moved to the delay stage, urging anyone with flu-like symptoms to self-isolate for 7 days. In America, Donald Trump has banned all travel from 26 European countries. This does not include the UK. However, health officials have said that the cases in the United Kingdom could be as high as 10,000. So Jake, to start with you, is the media scaremongering citizens in the UK, or should we be concerned about the current outbreak?
I think it goes both ways, really. I think, for one, there's a lot of things that have gone out, especially social media-wise, that have obviously caused a lot of concern among the general public. My advice on that is to ensure that when following advice, it's the advice of the government and also Public Health England, as they're the ones that can provide both accurate and up-to-date advice on what you should do when it comes to obviously COVID-19. However, there should also be concern as well, of course, because a lot of people are going and saying, this is just the flu, and we shouldn't worry. There should be a concern because obviously something that we don't know that well, and it should be taken with caution because obviously it might not harm yourself if you're a young, fit, able person, whereas you might risk passing it on to someone who has pre-existing conditions. So if you do have any symptoms, do self-isolate.
And Taylor, kind of moving on to you, is it necessary for people to be stockpiling like they are? Because they're doing this in vast numbers. People are stockpiling the amount of toilet rolls, the amount of pasta. Is this a necessary move to the public to make at this point?
No, certainly not. I mean, following just the government advice as well, the reason the government hasn't yet declared that schools and universities and workplaces should not be shut down is because they believe this is not the peak of the virus yet. This is not the point at which we should be quarantining ourselves. And the government has said when we do reach that peak, we could be looking at a lockdown of over around 12 weeks. So to start stockpiling now, which may be incredibly early, would be irresponsible. And it would also deny access for people who are suffering at the minute to resources that they vitally need.
So if we shut the universities and schools now, what you're saying is when it actually hits the peak, which could be in a few weeks' time, people might not respond in the same way. People might not self-isolate, and that is when it could be the most critical. However, looking at some kind of critics of what people have said about Johnson's response. Former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt this week said the government's lack of action was surprising and concerning. And Rory Stewart, who is actually was running for mayor before obviously the election's now been suspended, he actually said that they should be acting more aggressively to contain the coronavirus, and it is critical at this stage that the government should be doing more, and the delay stage isn't good enough. Have you any comments to say in response to that?
I completely agree. The whole point of a delay stage, this herd immunity idea that Boris Johnson is going with, the science-led approach, It may have some scientific validity to it, the idea of getting the population up to immunity, but we need to be delaying it at the same time. Shutting schools, shutting universities, areas where people are going to be in mass gatherings, because if we just allow it to run rampant and don't try to delay it properly, and the idea of trying to quickly build a herd immunity, the NHS simply isn't going to be able to cope with the number of severe cases.
But,
I think we have around 2.5 hospital beds per 1,000 members of the population.
But I think the Prime Minister is trying to say, Jake will probably agree with me here, is that by delaying the response, you're going to kind of prolong it until the summer, when there's going to be more space in the NHS, there's going to be more beds available for patients to use. And this is why the Prime Minister is justifying his response to the outbreak. It's going to hit the economy more than it's going to hit people. It could cause serious damage. The Chancellor has tried to adjust this week. The budget came out. £30 billion he announced for the coronavirus. He has suspended business rates for many firms, extending sick pay and boosting NHS funding. Jake, is this enough? Has the Chancellor done enough by doing this?
Well, I mean, you hear critics obviously criticise the response. I mean, a lot of the ideas coming from those don't really offer any solutions. I mean, look, this is something when tackling a virus such as this. There's not a just go-to response. There are things to do. Typically, when we have an outbreak of a new virus or new pathogen, but when looking at the different ways they are spreading, the different mutations they have, it's going to be a different pragmatic approach needs to be taken to deal with it. And I think when it comes down to, like Taylor said, I totally agree that we need to delay to ensure that obviously we have enough hospital beds, and also that elderly, more vulnerable people are able to take the steps required to self-isolate and protect themselves. But also, I do also see the idea that we must continue to, as much as possible, to go about everyday business so that the economy doesn't fall down. And I also welcome the budget as well. I think it does take into account any economic uncertainty and economic damage from it. And I think it's a positive way forward in the economy, but obviously something where we've got to take it step by step, and as things come, and in the future, I think the one thing the government should do and will do is respond to this virus accordingly, even though it might seem they're not doing too much at the moment. So I personally believe they are going to respond, obviously, in due course. Depending on how it escalates.
If we can focus on the budget for a second, it got released, and I actually think the Chancellor did quite a good job, considering that he had only been in the position for a few weeks. It's not really like a Conservative traditional budget, though, and I want to discuss this because I think it's important. The budget has revealed plans on £175 billion on infrastructure over the next 5 years, plus, as I mentioned before, a £30 billion injection to tackle against coronavirus. Taylor, why has this moved so far away from a Conservative budget that we would have seen 5 years ago?
Well, I think it's probably because our current Prime Minister is not a Conservative we would have seen 5 years ago. And as the recent election shows, the Conservatives have been targeting northern voters very specifically. They're adjusting their strategy in order to keep those voters and maintain their trust. Now, I'm very glad to see the budget is going in this direction. It's impossible to look at the budget, of course, without viewing coronavirus. It's a coronavirus budget, and I think the precautions that the Chancellor has taken are very sensible at this stage. But I think it should be very fluid in the future, responding to circumstances. As Jake says, a lot of small businesses are going to be majorly hurt by this. You know, look in Italy. Italy has had to bail out its hotel industry, subsidise it to ensure that it can stay afloat. You know, which it got fined for by the EU, by the way. And we need to be prepared to act just in the same way.
And is it good enough for the Prime Minister to say that many loved ones will be lost? Obviously, we spoke about Italy, Spain. I was actually speaking to a girl this week at the university who travelled back from Madrid. She was allowed back into the country, and there was no screening at the airport for fever or temperature. And this was at Tuesday, Wednesday. And now Spain has had, it's been put on a 15-day emergency, and the amount of cases infected is over 5,000. So why didn't the government act quicker with this for Spanish immigrants or tourists that came back to the UK?
I completely agree. The government has said on this issue that they're taking the science approach. Medical officers have told them that delaying flights and cancelling trips would have a minimal effect. I disagree with that. I think minimising the amount of people who come into this country from areas that are of high risk for the coronavirus is necessary to ensure that as few people in this country are exposed to extra cases as possible.
There's always ways in which you can't fully lock down a country, and as I say before, we must ensure that for the sake of the economy, not just because of the economy itself, but also because people still need to work.